Okay, so I'm going to do a little piece on Jacinda Ardern from beginning to end. It's basically a rehash of my Jacinda Ardern in 7 minutes, which I put out before the last 2017 election. And again, I didn't just pick on Jacinda. I did one of these for John Key, and I did one of these for all basically the political parties. But the Jacinda Ardern one took off, and it's been quoted quite a lot, and it's also been quite often like parts of it have been quoted out of context. And again, I spent a lot of time during the Jacinda Ardern year of listening to people kind of like describing Jacinda Ardern as a dirty communist and going, well, you can't have her being dirty communist and at the same time, um, complaining because she's sucking up to the BlackRock and the TPPA. Like basically her behaviour. My attitude is there are three types of people who view Jacinda Ardern. There are those who generally buy all the spin, and they are almost willfully dumb. They are not looking at how manicured and how packaged basically Jacinda Ardern's brand was, or how it's been controlled. They're choosing to ignore all the techniques, and they just want to believe in a fairy story. And I'm not in that category. The second group is equally stupid. They kind of keep wanting to try and put Jacinda Ardern as being socialist, and try and make this idea that socialism is a bad thing, and that all these billionaires, like all these people that are talking about these globalists, none of them again are socialists. They're all billionaires. So my take is from the attitude of I see Jacinda Ardern as being just a slightly refined, made-up version of Rogernomics 2.0. I think everything about it screams neoliberalism. And, once you actually really start to pay attention to where the funding was from behind her and where a lot of the guys, and it's a little bit like the story about the COVID laboratory. Like originally Peter Dasnick went around talking to all these different scientists saying, no, we want you to sign this letter that didn't come from a laboratory whatsoever at all. And then that became the story because all the journalists went to the people that Dasnick had already basically made sure that they were all on the narrative. So because nobody did any real fact checking, he was able to, for quite some time, get away from like getting us convinced that it was from bats, and that people still hold on to that. For the same reasons they hold on to Jacinda Ardern gets all this overseas praise, and there's a certain type of middle class person in New Zealand that's just kind of cringeworthy and goes, "Oh, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it fantastic?" Because apparently, anytime New Zealand's made, they're so insecure they can't actually they immediately assume that that's credit to them, and they gush wonderfully, and they don't understand actually how much of this is pre-packaged and how much of this is actually manufactured. The video beforehand I look at Sir William Sargent's, and I'm going to go into basically how the fact that she's got these very influential public relations people basically messaging and kind of grooming her along the way to make sure that she presents this image when the reality is her walk doesn't match her talk. So we've used up 3 minutes already, so we'll see if we can try and keep this under 10 minutes anyway. So okay, we'll begin. So Jacinda Ardern is the father of Ross Ardern. Ross Ardern is a senior police officer. He served as a diplomat in the Pacific. He was named amongst the different people that were accused of donating money to the National Front over the tourism policy on Niue in 2017. This resulted in defamation proceedings against Andrew Little, which he stepped down. And then basically it turned out that actually it wasn't defamation, but no one ever came back to that. No one ever turned around and said, well, wait a minute, isn't that actually like the father of this woman that's now taking over? Like, isn't that a little bit weird? Why are we not talking about this? So then, basically, of course, she went into that position. The background before that was she went to Waikato University and she did a degree in communications. Now, communications is literally spin. It's literally the art of saying a little bombed out building in a war zone is a little fixer-upper in a fast-moving neighbourhood. That is what communications is about. It's about learning how to tell better lies. That's the profession, So again, like a lot of people like John Key and even with Obama and even maybe not Trump would be a poor example, but we've moved into this generation where we're now voting for people who we don't really fact check or do a deep dive on before we actually vote them. So she did a communications degree, and she also wanted to do a postgraduate degree. Now, this is a bit harder to pin down, and again, there's a lot of what I perceive is when you really start to look at Jacinda's background, there's things which are kind of vaguely mentioned or glossed over, and they don't really encourage you to look at them too much. And when for example, I talked about after being a communications expert, she went to work selling the New Zealand experiment. Now, this is called Rogernomics or neoliberalism. This is the idea of presenting right-wing economics as having a social front or a social progressive liberal front, when in actual fact it's the outcomes, the economic outcomes are it actually hurts the very people that it's claiming to protect. That's what we discovered about Rogernomics. Lots and lots of books about it. Jacinda Ardern seems to be very much about wanting to continue promoting this neoliberal concept. And again, when you look at who's around her, this is not surprising. She went to the United Kingdom. She was assisted by Chris Hipkins, who, the current leader of the Labour Party, who basically just trained in criminology, went on to work for Human Resources and Shell Oil. Go and have a look at Shell Oil. If you want a company that's got a really sucky, evil history, Shell is one of them. And again, all this talk about climate change and carbon credit, we kind of get a little bit of this into the United Nations. I'll get a bit into this when I talk about United Nations, but there's a lot of gaslighting going on, and there's a lot of image laundering going on. And again, I see this during Jacinda Ardern's career, where she didn't stop deep sea mining or looking for oil. She just put a moratorium in, and the friends that were Labour were trying to cultivate, they were allowed to continue to do it. It was only other people weren't, which did again Seymour and ACT changed round. But let's get back to the chronological order. So from basically went to work for Tony Blair. Basically, again, we don't really talk very much about what she did for Tony Blair. She goes, I didn't really like him. Well, that's great. You might not like Adolf Hitler, and if you're sensible, you're not going to go and work for him. So when you choose to go and work for somebody, regardless of whether you like them or not, you're kind of buying into their values. And as your job was part of this Victoriana and Waikato cadre of politicians who were handpicked by the Labour Party, by Helen Clark, which even later after the several, because I talked about she was listed as a senior policy advisor, and then they kept on changing it. Every time it came out and it didn't look good, Labour would go in and rework the CV. So again, it's all part of this. You are being presented a package. This is not the real Jacinda Ardern you think you get to know. She went to work. First of all, she started working for Sir William Sargent, who I mentioned in the previous video I just did beforehand about looking at how these, overseas corporate brands that, he's a brand merchant. That's literally what he does. He does makeovers, and that's what he's taught her the dark arts, and looks like from what we've seen of his involvement in different movies, which have been, tried to actually promote her to make her this, great almighty liberal progressive saint that she's not. And again, it's like the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. For ages, I was saying to people like, no, don't be fooled. This is not liberalism. You don't fly in on Learjets and stay at $10,000 room hotels if you're actually a progressive liberal. But for years, we went and brought up with this. And again, she bought his book and went on about how great he is. And eventually, the fabric came down. We all realised that Klaus Schwab was just basically what his daddy had always been, a right-wing corporate goose-stepping Nazi. And that's nothing's really changed. And again, all these globalist organisations that we have rapidly got involved in the 1980s, when you look at them, they may have like Parliamentarians for Global Actions, very interesting one, formerly known as Parliamentarians for Global Order. Go and have a look at the Privy Council. It still exists as mothball. You'll be amazed at how many people at our highest, even though it's mothballed, court, actually line up to this organisation that makes itself out to be progressive liberal, but ultimately it is corporates controlling these particular committees and organisations. So, forget about the packaging, because again, this is all about the propaganda and the communications experts like they hire, like Jacinda Adern, to make it, a bombed out building in a war zone seem like a fast little fixer-upper. So she went to work under Sir William Sargent's the Better Business Bureau, which basically its job was to streamline public-private partnerships, so that the idea was that the public would pay for these partnerships and the profit or privatisation could accumulate most of the profits, at the same time creating a whole series of red tape which would be really good at destroying small businesses. And you basically end up in a situation where, if you want to blame any communism, what you move into is a situation called state capitalism, which is a term that Vladimir Lenin came about, which is where basically the socialist dream has been come about by partnering up with big private areas, so they end up with a monopoly. And this is something that basically Lenin brought in, but it's a bunch of bullshit, because basically that was all done again with corporatisation of people like Rockefeller and so on, and it was just basically about selling the the socialist idea down the drain. And again, this is mentioned in the book Translating History, which is written by Igor Kovacs, last name, but he was the translator for Gorbachev. And he kind of goes into this in this book about translating history, basically about how much of socialism in Russia was actually destroyed by these, it never eventuated. And so that's the model which Helen Clark and Jacinda Ardern believe is compromised, the state liberal model, which basically allows corporations to have a monopoly. And as I said, you'll never see any situation where it actually evolves into this mythical land of Easter bunnies, and just doesn't happen. Not in that particular execution of socialism. There was a guy called Allende who tried to do it, but then the CIA bombed him. And there was another guy called Whitlam who was leaning towards that approach, but then the CIA overthrew him in a coup. And then there was a guy in New Zealand that died very suddenly, and he also had that same approach, and his name was Norman Kirk. Are you kind of getting where I'm getting at this viewpoint? Anyway, so she worked for Better Business Bureau, and then as a senior policy advisor, so not just a little munchkin, she was actually, executing all these neoliberal ideas that she picked up via Victoria, that was being sold at Victoria University and Waikato University via associates of this whole, corruption of socialism. And under that, she then went to work for Sir Ronnie Flanagan, basically very, very bad reputation for when he ran the Royal Ulster Cabs Constabulary, was a member of the Orange Group, which basically is a pseudo-Masonic organisation. They arranged to do this police review in the United Kingdom, which was the result of Operation Tiberius, which was systematic corruption within the police net, the flying squad, and other elements of the UK London police, which was largely a result of basically friendship societies like Masonic Lodge. And everyone goes, oh, the Masons, free, and roll their eyes. But the reality is, when you have a paternal organisation that has access to, through privilege, more money, and it's secretive, probably shouldn't be letting them anywhere inside sensitive organisations like government or police. And this is what happened in the UK, and very sensible adult people papers like The Independent and The Guardian covered this issue to such a point that the police had to do something about it. So they got an ex-Freemason, and they got Jacinda Adern, who, again, when we get to this whole issue about her postgraduate degree, it gets very murky about where it actually occurred, but we do know it was paid for on a scholarship on the Freemasons Lodge. So again, the same organisation that a lot of senior police management are involved to the point that their band is on every single police hat. And normally, kind of the higher you got, the more likely you're likely to be in the lodge. So we've got the situation where, a former Freemason and the daughter of highly a probable Freemason who's at least received Freemason funding is put in charge of a police review, which basically sells them the New Zealand model, IPCA model, which we're rapidly coming to conclusion from things like the McSkimming affair and Howard Broad and blah, 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 and a lot of stuff I've written for about 20 years. Turns out, actually, they're all corrupt as a lot of dogs' legs bent, and the IPCA isn't fit for purpose. And that's what they found out in the United Kingdom. They eventually dumped it. So, way to go, Jacinda. That you had a lasting impact. And then she had a little bit of there's another little black spot in her career, and this is in London, and there's lots of rumours about it, but for some reason, she was then transported over to New York, and there's a story that she sells like she was working in a soup kitchen. I double dare you, I triple dare you, I quadruple dare you to name the soup kitchen she worked for. Again, one of those areas in Jacinda's autobiography and the story that she sells that never gets any scrutiny from her fans, and oddly enough, even the people that actually are meant to be her opposition and going on about it being a communist don't like to talk about too much. And I think I know the reason why that is too, because when you follow the money trail, it comes back to the same people. We don't know the soup kitchen Jacinda worked for, but we do know that when she was just about to finish being the Prime Minister of New Zealand, she was going to get married at Cape Kidnappers, and that runs owned by John Griffin, who's the founder of the Robin Hood Foundation. The Robin Hood Foundation is one of the things I've been banging my drum about, and I've been focusing a lot about the Christchurch Foundation as an example, is these are dangerous charities. These are charities which are set up to basically mean that the person who puts money into them, and the money can sometimes come from very, very dubious sources, will put that money into these charities and then get a 33% tax rebate because John Key from Merrill Lynch, who, they're very interesting. I could do a whole connection about Merrill Lynch and JP Morgan and Michael Aquino, but that's another story altogether. But John Key set these charity laws and create questions which allow you to make 33% unlimited donations, but you get a 33% rebate. Used to be $5,000, 2.5, he changed it, and suddenly all these big, massive, organised professional charities pop up, and they run in the vein of like the Christchurch Foundation, where up until the 2019 shooting, they were never making any money more than the operational costs, and a lot of things that they were donating for were the things which were rather questionable about whether or not they were charitable at all. In fact, they could be basically carrying out organisations, plans for making money, calling it a charity, a big thinking, a thinking thing, and basically a cool organisation like KPMG would get a free survey done and be able to get a tax cut from it. There's extra terminology. If we turn around and we look at the why the world's in debt today, where it's some trillions and trillions, and you go, well, how can this be? This is because of things like this, these sort of charities, which basically allow rich people to print money out of nowhere, and basically they end up corrupting or destroying the economy of like parasites of the country, the host, from inside out. And this is what the Robin Hood Foundation has a very famous name for, and it's uses a lot of celebrities to master this. It's got people like P. Diddy, Oprah Winfrey, who are again part of the same little stable that we see out there now, packaging Jacinda Ardern and getting on to television, along with the Stephen Calvert report, who had also hosted previously, he had hosted John Key and I think Tonight Report. So all of these shows, which are all controlled by these very corporatised networks that are projecting this like, oh, isn't she so kind, she's so powerful, in a very controlled narrative, while not looking at the fact that the charities which they're actually connected to are actually sucking the vitality and life force of the country out and causing massive inequality and linked to some very, very, very bad people. Again, you look at the Robin Hood Foundation, and again, we've got John Griffin and Glenn Dooman, who's partner, and he's one of the people that's very, very tied up in the whole Epstein accusations and the $120 million of money that was paid out from JP Morgan, which also involved Larry Page, who has very, very tight connections to the New Zealand government during the administration area. They were trying to make this like flying airplane, and he was one of the guys that came into New Zealand during the lockdown. A whole bunch of these tech guys that all turned up in the middle of fucking lockdown, and nobody wants to talk about this, or their tech connections, or their business company connections, or the fact that a lot of these guys are also part of the whole Five Eyes network, which under Jacinda Ardern, we went deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. So instead of trying to moving us towards a neutral country, which had this big high moral mandate as a result of the nuclear-free legacy, instead Jacinda Ardern was like sucking us into Five Eyes and letting more and more rockets fly off from Rocket Lab in Mahé Peninsula, carrying very, very dubious payloads, to the point that they actually breached our own nuclear-free legislation, not once, but twice. And Jacinda was sitting there talking about carbon's going to be our new nuclear-free legacy, while she busily shat on that legacy. And of course, not to mention, of course, that Rocket Lab was firing rockets at, what those things do to the carbon footprint is not good. Much like the actual databases, which again were being allowed, part of the deals that were happening during the Jacinda Ardern year, that were going to be built up in New Zealand, that were going to be really bad for our rivers and also really bad for our carbon footprints. But again, none of those people that just think that she's a saint and they don't want to hear this because they're living in la la land as they drink their Chardonnay socialism, because they're not actual real socialists, don't want to hear about it. And again, this is definitely not the hallmarks of socialism. So although she's a dirty socialist, doesn't really kind of work very well when you actually, partnered up heavily with people that just want to make as much money as possible and screw the planet and screw the people that actually have to put up with consequences of their making lots and lots and lots of money. And again, John Griffin was very, very good friends with Julian Roberts, who's the Wizard of Wall Street. Now, he's the guy that John Key partnered up, because he got into all this whole idea about, actually, we'll make New Zealand a bolt hole for billionaires, so all the rich guys who are screwing their own country, if things get wrong, they can come and live here, because they've already got billionaire bunkers and wineries and all these luxury houses been set up, because the government, like Nationals, given these like preferential millionaires, like Peter Thiel, again linked into Epstein, again doing business deals, not just during Key's administration but during the Jacinda Ardern's government area. Do these things, which again, like when Labor came through, they didn't turn around and walk away from the giving millionaires instant residency. Great, because we all want, so not millionaires, billionaires, because we all know these guys come into this country and they just enjoy it and they don't get involved in local politics. Yeah, right. No, didn't matter. They don't care where the money's come from, as long as they're getting money to actually get themselves elected. It's chasing power for power's sake. And again, so from that particular position, we went to Jacinda goes, okay, cool. I'm at the United Nations. I'm working for Soup Kitchen. Well, we don't know what Soup Kitchen is, but looking at who her mates are, who gave her the mansion that she was going to get married at. It's it paints a picture of the kind of people that she's willing to be associated with. So what she did instead was she came back and she worked for Phil Goff. Now, Phil Goff is a dyed-in-the-wool neoliberal. Now, he's the one that, again, part of this whole culture into her perception of how the world works, what politics. So he's the one that cultures her in all the way, and she's had all the grooming and training from Helen Clark, who, again, remember Helen Clark, through the 2004 Foreshore Act and the Supreme Court Act, basically screwed over the Maoris in New Zealand and made it so that the mining companies would have greater access to get into our foreshores. And this is all the beginning of the Atlas plan that we're seeing right now. And my biggest critique is that people tend to think that only Atlas is courting Act in the New Zealand First and National. No, it's been doing Labour quite heroically too. And I'd even question under James Shaw with his, he was a former communications expert for Bayer Monsanto and Hong Kong Shanghai Bank and Nestle's, who all could be found, especially Nestle's, but there were a bunch of guys that came in to, I think it was 2015, so maybe a little bit before Jacinda's time, but a bunch of guys came in, checked out the glaciers in Franz Josef, basically kind of came up with this blueprint with the idea that all of New Zealand's water would be part of a derivatives market that they could actually trade, and at the same time they could, that all pure water be worth so much and the aquifer water be so much, it would leave us all this river to be actually used to run data centers that could then muddy up our waters and cause our stomach cancer rates to go high, sky high through the roof. That's all the stuff kind of going on in 2015, all the lead up to TPPA, when again you've got people like Mark Christie, who's the DuPont and agri-farmers, I think, saying like, well, after TPA is passed, don't worry, we'll be able to produce our version of science and there'll be nothing that people will be able to do anything about it. So Jacinda Ardern gets elected. She doesn't run as an electoral candidate, she runs as a list candidate. So basically, she's just like John Key running for botany. Her position is safe. So she never really got elected by the people. But again, they've made this big overseas myth that she's the people's hero, which never actually is how it was anyway. So then she went from there to, I said, climb the ranks and then got into position after the Andrew Little and the Naiu fiasco involving Ross Ardern. And meanwhile, just as a side note, her uncle is the top guy at the Mormon Church, one of the biggest buyers up of the real estate investors of technology in the Pacific region, by the way, in case you didn't know that. And so the first thing she does is she gets elected as the Prime Minister and she signs off on the TPPA. This is the thing that Labour said they'd walk away from, and the thing that I got into lots and lots of trouble with these dyed-in-the-world, socialists that don't like to admit the fact that actually Labour actually were the ones that tabled the TPA. So again, they're claiming that they're socialists, so they're going Che Guevara and, marching around campus and wearing their red shirts. All the meantime, they're busily the corporate as much as they possibly can, and will allow going along with corporate decisions and then pretending to walk away and pretending like that they never had that position beforehand, i.e. the TPA. So nobody gave her a hard time in the party faithful about the fact that she just signed off the TPA, which, as I said, would now allow big pharmaceutical companies a chance to dictate what kind of medicine policy you would have in New Zealand, to give us the medicine policy that they would maximise their profits, not the medical policy that would actually help New Zealand. And again, we started to see continued health cuts. And again, you can't blame it on Jacinda Ardern. It actually goes all the way back to 84. There's a direct correlation to the amount of money being cut from the health system in education is directly proportional to the amount of money we're spending on police, spies and army equipment as we go deeper and deeper into the Five Eyes network. And our whole purpose about this is about freedom and protecting us from evil Russians, because again, all during 2014 all the way up basically until probably about 2018, we still had plenty of Russians doing business here in New Zealand. And part of the deal, Labour, New Zealand First deal, was that they wanted a New Zealand-Russian trade deal. So when Ron Mark's going on about the Ukraine, he's not talking about. I say to him, well, Ron, you guys wanted to do a trade deal with a Russian. What about all those dodgy Russians which I was warning you about before? And you're like, no, they're all cool. And you all kept quiet. And then, of course, the invaded Russian came in 2022. And suddenly, they were the worst evil guys in the world, even though you'd be going, all that time before it. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with a bit of that. But when you're trying to say you're something else and then you keep doing it, it's a bit hypocritical. So, yes, okay, she signs a TPA. She puts a moratorium basically on drilling, which doesn't stop drilling. It just stops the drilling exploration for new people. The people that have made deals with Labor, it's like what's happening with the police purge at the moment. The purge of the police at the moment is not corrupt cops. It's all the people that are not friendly towards National. And National's going to go through and put their people in, and then it'll be their, and it's just a change of the guard. But the same schlock carries on. We're still going to get bent top coppers who are going to do bent top copper stuff, because that's how you climb the careers, in this country of neoliberalism. That's how you climb the ranks. When was the last time you saw anyone being held accountable for misuse of money or doing something that they shouldn't in this corporatised government that we actually have? TPA, yes, great. TPA, more Five Eyes, more Rocket Lab, more health cuts. So even during the height of the COVID crisis, if you take away the money that was being used to dismantle the health systems and replace them with something even worse, but they weren't just replacing them because, like, those health systems allow people like Michael Swan to come in and rip $20 million out of the system without anyone knowing, because they were so saturated in consultants. Again, all part of this Labor National have all been just filling our government up with consultants that just come up with policies that serve the corporate agenda but not ours, and then we get to pay for it. And that's again, her previous boyfriend was a public relations expert. I want to say Gordon Thomas, but it was one of the big public relations firms that were all again in this whole business of basically getting governments to do left and right, do what they actually wanted to do. So then she went off to got involved with David Clark, who pretty much had done nothing in his entire career apart from do a few DJing spots. DJ Sticky Buds, I think was his name. So he's on the scene now, and suddenly he starts getting more radio work and more DJ because he's the husband of someone famous. And nobody in our country says, well, actually this is not really kind of appropriate. We're actually a functioning democracy. We should be having checks and balances about this kind of overt crony nepotism where, I'll give your boyfriend or your partner a job and then you can say nice flattering things about us. So again, while she's doing this whole situation, the next thing that happens, of course, is the Christchurch call, which came about because Brenton Tarrant could buy arms online, which is something that she had been part of the committee that went ahead and did it, even though the student community said, no, let's not do it. And then, of course, there were massive intelligence failures that occurred. And I'm getting into these with a lot of academics elsewhere, and we've been doing different shows on this, but it wasn't like, she goes and shows these selfies of her wearing a hijab, which is, I think, actually quite culturally dubious. But anyway, she does this situation. Suddenly they appear spontaneously on silos in Melbourne, like, let's not go into who actually funded that. Let's buy the shock that this was all spontaneous and that none of these photos were done by professional photographers. No, we won't. We'll ignore the fact that this person is a communications expert and surrounded by communications experts who are masters at controlling the narrative. And we'll ignore the fact that there was plenty of intelligence. So instead, and those police in turn, the Labor police, who then obviously I've just told you, Nationals kind of busily pushing them out and putting their own people in. They made sure that they didn't, put any hardship on Jacinda in terms of how her policies had contributed, and she in return didn't put in any hardship on the police to point out how they had really goofballed this in terms of intelligence. They missed the lockdown of the Otago University, which had same grammatical signatures and so on that locked them into the Christchurch, definitely being the Christchurch shooter. They missed the break-in to the pistol club, which showed that there were issues with those pistol clubs. They missed the multiple witnesses reporting very, very dodgy things going on in those pistol clubs, which were being used heavily by the police. The Royal Inquiry said, no, that's all hearsay, although I've got photos that show you that there actually are human targets there. There's weapons with fixed bayonets. There's weapons that have been pumped up there. They've all come down off the internet, and it's quite funny because, of course, the whole Christchurch call was about protecting us from hate. In reality, what it seems to be doing is the internet seems to be going through and clearing out all these possible things that could point mistakes and demonstrate how there was this police intelligence failure. So, as opposed to stopping hate, it's really been used as a tool of censorship by Five Eyes and these tech lords, as I said it was going to be used at the beginning. And again, these Five Eyes Christchurch call, when we look at it, the way it goes is business advice. She sets up business advisory. She puts Chris Luxon involved in it for $700,000 a year, and he's just screwed Air New Zealand. And one of the things they ask the business advisor is, why did Air New Zealand make a lot of money? And then she becomes the prime. When she loses, Chris Luxon turns around and points her on top of the Christchurch call so that he can turn around and again sell the narrative. And at the same time, the charities that are involved in people donating money to the Christchurch Foundation, when we start to look more and more into it, there's something very, very rotten and stinky there, to the point that we find that one of the founders is very closely affiliated through Alan Hubbard as co-business founder of South Christchurch Foundation with a business that traces back to the Paradise Papers to the Policy Exchange, which is doing exactly the same thing, saying, oh, we need greater internet censorship overseas in the United Kingdom to protect us from Muslim extremists. So over here, we've got to protect us from right-wing hate speech, and over there it's Muslim. But actually what it's doing is just introducing greater control, so it's harder to criticise the corporates that are taking over, and have this huge army of lawyers and public relations experts that can make people look beautiful and be beautiful people, which if you're brain dead and you're a coward and you don't want to look, that's all you need. That's the nature of propaganda. Propaganda isn't designed to stop people from seeing stuff. It just gives cowards an excuse to go, and that's pretty much all what happened with her. And then during the course of the COVID, okay, we've become so brain infected on this. Neoliberalism is not just taking over our economy, it's taking over our mindset, that we just protest against the TPA and Pharmac taking control of our medical, and we've just signed them a blind check. We didn't get to see what we signed up for the TPA, so the Pfizer contract. Never got to see it. And people are like, oh no, we don't need to see that. Well, you might not need to if you're a thumb-sucking coincidence theorist, but I'm actually an adult. I want to know what I'm actually signing up for. And the fact that we've got a leader that's so happy to sign us up into secret documents, no, it's not acceptable. And again, the same people that people love Jacinda Ardern, hate Donald Trump. Fair enough, I'm not going to give you, he's a schmuck, I get it. But you do get, he actually signed off on this whole Pfizer deal. And so this whole that we don't actually get to see what's in it, and we're all okay. That's Donald Trump. So the guy you hate, he's responsible, and our Prime Minister went along with it. And no, let's not talk about that. That's conspiracy theory. No, it's called business, and we've just been conned right royally. So anyway, she's done all this stuff, and she got all these awards, and again, she's meant to be a progressive liberal, so she accepted the damehood in a heartbeat. So damehood, sirhood, how does that go with God? Want to get rid of the CPA, we want to get rid of the flag, we want to become a republic, but we'll accept your knighthoods, we'll accept your damehoods. It's again more of this neoliberal hypocrisy. Don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. Okay, oh, we're progressive liberal, but I'll accept a damehood. I'll go to Buckingham Palace and drink out of a gold cup. I'll wander around with designer jewellery. I'll go and have my wedding at billionaires' mansions. It's then when she made They Are Us, or wanted to make They Are Us, the Muslim community turned around and said, no, this is cultural appropriation, and it died. So instead they went off and they made their own little documentary, which no doubt they got grants and aid for, as did other projects, which is again all about, we're going to use the public paid money to make us look good. Well, give me $1 million and I can look pretty damn good too. But, again, there's some people that are not very adult and they want to live in this fantasy land and they want to buy the schlock. So now there's all this overseas press talking about how great Jacinda Ardern is, and isn't she won all these awards. Again, not looking too deeply at who controls these awards or the corporatisation, and she'll probably end up being nominated for the position of Secretary of the United Nations, which is what I forecast about Helen Clark's foreign policy, which I said was she sold the country down until the mining companies so she got a job at the United Nations. Everyone laughed. And then she got a job at the United Nations, and everyone kept quiet about that. And I've said the same thing about Jacinda. I am, from my 7 minutes on Jacinda Ardern, the first person to say this is the whole game plan from game one. Lots and lots of people now jumping on the bandwagon, but I was the original person. And I'm saying to you, when she takes over the United Nations, she becomes the Secretary General of the United Nations, which I think is the end game. She will be all these press, the same press, which want to sell this neoliberalism lie so that the coincidence theorists can suck their thumb and thinking that they're all okay because they're wearing the right thing and they must not be really racist or actually classist. Oh no, because I vote for her, so I must be one of the good guys. Because that's of course the nature of nationalism, as all will say, is it removes your ability to show any ability to be retrospectively critical of yourself. You can only see goodness. It's all the other people are the bad people. As Secretary of the United Nations, she'll sell policies which on the surface will again be protecting the planet and being kind and being diversified. But the reality is these policies will be executed through the United Nations, through committees, through select committees, through different steering committees. And these steering committees, when you look at them, will be made up of the United Nations sustainable partners. And that will include people like DuPont, Bayer Monsanto, the company that James Shaw from the Greens was involved in. It'll involve Shell Oil, the company that Chris Hipkins is involved with. It'll involve BP, the company that's currently fighting the Rockefellers in Israel for the control of the oil resources. One wants it in the ground, one actually wants it out of the ground, and they're fighting BP, who are also busily doing nasty things in Africa. So there's a whole bunch of people. There is no goodies or baddies in that. It's just corporatizations screwing this planet for maximum profit and driving us into the ground and drawing us closer to the extinction as they possibly can. But we can all wander around with wonderful glasses of Chardonnay thinking that we're progressive liberals while the planet burns. And that's what Jacinda Ardern's going to actually welcome you in. It's not going to be a socialism nightmare or a communism takeover. It's going to be basically a corporate dystopia. And again, we see this is an extension of Helen Clark. Before Helen Clark became the leader of the United Nations Development Programme, the United Nations was anti-genetic GM. And it had very good reason to, because the science wasn't in. And the science, and I'm talking about the real science, not the science that Mark Christie from DuPont wants to say is, we're going to make sure that our science gets heard, the story, and will be heard through the corporate channels from which gets our government public funding or our corporatised public funding. Nothing wrong with public funding. In fact, we need more of it for the media, but not when you control the agenda. And that's, again, what happened during Jacinda Ardern. And she lowered the bar, and now she permitted Acton National to run the same policies. At the same time, she introduced policies which undermine our civil liberties in New Zealand, which again, ACT and National are now using. They're not going to repeal them, and they're going to put more through. And when we get a new Labour government next year, probably not. I don't actually see them winning, but if that does happen eventually, they're not going to come back and repeal anything, because we're going to see this constant marching left, right, lockstep of neoconservatism, neoliberalism, which ultimately at the end of it just gives us new kings, but these new kings are corporatised kings. And that's what Dame Jacinda is all part of. So that's my 7 minutes in Jacinda Ardern, taking all of 37 minutes, and my little Christmas gift to you guys. So when you actually want to know the truth about Jacinda Ardern and her background, she's not a dirty communist. She's not even a socialist. Oh yeah, okay, I forgot to mention that bit. And we'll go out on this. Quite often they'll turn around and talk about how when she was at, I think it was Birmingham University, which is the university that's controlled by Mormons in the United States. And she was the president of the international, or the youth arm, which its derivative parent was the International Socialist Organisation. As one of the guys I spoke to recently turned around and said, the Trotskys give the ISO a hard time, and he doesn't like the Trotskys, they're all militant. But I think at the end of the day, what the Worldwide Socialist website, which was the ones that pointed out that the ISO, which is the parent organisation of that one that Jacinda Ardern belongs to, was actually a front for Central Intelligence Agency. And they were using this again, this model of we appear as a progressive liberal to use progressive liberals on campus to bring about regime changes in countries that we don't actually like. Not because they're socialists, but because we want their gas, their oil, and their resources. And that is what she is. She's an extenuation of this entire fairy story that the middle class, some people in the fairy middle class still want to believe that Jacinda Ardern represents this Labour Party that's all fair and wonderful, and they want to ignore the fact that it's actually basically, been part of something that's actually undermined the egalitarian values of that this country was built about, and for a long time we were maintained by people like Norman Kirk. Norman Kirk is a completely different creature from Jacinda Ardern, and anybody that thinks that Jacinda Ardern is liberal, progressive, after knowing all this information and going out and researching themselves, and still believes that she represents the progressive liberal values, has their head up their arse. Merry Christmas, everybody.